Welcome back, you cute, curious tomcats and kittens. It's the 5th episode of Hard Talks Podcast, and boy, do we have a lot to cover today. I actually decided to split this episode into 2 parts because there was just so much information about these guys, and we don't do 2-hour-long episodes here anymore. But we're continuing our saga about the 5 most powerful families who just may rule the world. So today we will learn about the 4th family in this cartel, the Rockefeller clan. Now, while doing my research, I realized that there's 2 sides to the information you find on this family, like any story. One is charitable, philanthropic, giving back billions, especially to Black or Indigenous communities. The other is shrouded in fascism and racism and is geared towards a world-dominating order. So, that's crazy. Like the rest of the public for like 4 generations now, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this family. So, get ready. Really quick, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. A lot of listeners don't realize that this whole episode is also filmed, and you can watch it on the YouTube channel. There's lots of clips and old pictures throughout the video. Because let's be honest, if you're someone like me with chronic ADHD, you need the little extras to keep you captivated. So, I got you. All our audio episodes, any previews, and all full-length videos will be right there. I also posted a link in our little bios on all the socials, if that's more convenient, but only if you're interested and want to support the show. Love you guys. Anyways, enough of that. Quick reminder before diving down our rabbit hole today. Excuse me. Here at Hard Talks, we will treat all conspiracies as such, since, most have never been confirmed or denied. However, that said, it's very important to stay skeptical, my friends, as the control that these banking families exert over the global economy and our governments, it cannot be overstated. And it's quite intentionally shrouded in secrecy and mystery. They don't want any of that good stuff getting out there. But they do say that 70% of the conspiracies you hear about turn out to be true. So, like I like to say, just keep your minds open. Think unlimited with me here. It's not all secret societies and devil worshipping. You don't have to wear a tinfoil hat the whole time, even if it does play a big role. It's about following the money trail, realizing what these folks have actually done throughout our history, and then connecting the dots to the rest of their affiliations through their own reputations and what they have done and such. You know what I'm saying? They have enough wealth and power to paint the picture any way they'd like. And their corporate media arms, they're quick to discredit any information exposing their private lives and agendas. Shit, it was hard to even find their actual net worth. You can't. You know what I mean? That's why there's 2 sides to the media. 2 sides to every good story, and a 2-part podcast on them. They've paid lots of money to put good information out there, to bury the dirty deeds that they've done or change the public perception. And they do a good job, you'll see. But however you filter the following information is totally up to you. Now, the good. The House of Rockefeller. When I hear the name, I actually think of Rockefeller Center. We all know it from any Christmas movie filmed in New York City where they put up the giant, enormous tree. It's beautiful, magical, all lit up in its glory. The name sparks a little bit of nostalgia. Some big, warm, fuzzy feelings to some. While to others, the name brings a remembrance of great loss. The Rockefeller bloodline conspiracies run just as deep, guys, if not deeper, than all the rest of these families that we've been talking about, okay? They have been accused of so many outlandish things. Conspiracies of all kinds, really. From being extraterrestrials, lizard people, manipulating the market, to owning the Federal Reserve, our banking system, to playing a part in the Marijuana Prohibition Act with the DuPonts, to sustaining big pharma with their petroleum byproducts, okay? They're everywhere. The Rockefellers' combined personal and social connections of the various family members are vast, to put it lightly, both in the United States and throughout the world, including the most powerful politicians, royalty, public figures, and chief businessmen. I mean, when you rule the world of oil, I mean, think of all the connections you have over in the Middle East, too. Many members of the Rockefeller clan even went on to hold high positions in office themselves. There were several governors, several secretaries. Shoot, Nelson Rockefeller even went on to being vice president during 1974 through 77 for Gerald Ford, after first being a secretary twice, and then a governor of New York for a long-ass time, like 59 through 73 or something, okay? Like, yeah, these guys had mega power. John D. Sr., the patriarch of the family, the guy, who's credited for building their empire from the ground up, is said to have like over 150 descendants, direct descendants, okay? So even though we're going to like take a close scope at just 3 of the most infamous members of this family, it's not like some tiny little family that you might be imagining. It's not huge, like 3,500 descendants like in the DuPont's case, but no, it's not like some tiny little family, yo. It's a network of intellectual bankers who hold our country and our economy by the freaking balls. Okay. Give him a little tickle. But John D. Sr. was even offered the position of Secretary of the Treasury by President Richard M. Nixon twice. I don't know why that was so hard to say. Nixon twice, but he declined on both occasions. He knew his power was much greater at the helm of Chase Bank because him and JP become good buddies, if you will. But there were also a bunch of puppet masters in power at the time, like the Rothschilds and the Morgans, who wanted J.D. Rockefeller Sr. to be president of the United States. But the guy knew that would also be a massive demotion, so he turned that down. Could you imagine? But what this extremely powerful family is probably best known for is being the American industrial family that owns one of the world's largest fortunes still today and owns up to 80%, if not all of the world's oil today. Okay? That's debated. But not only that, they were the guys who also figured out what you could do with crude oil. Can you say hello, petroleum? Think gasoline, diesel fuel, every kind of plastic, rubber, jet fuel, wax, asphalt, lubricants. Okay, even your Vaseline, bitches, castor oil. It even says on the jar, pure petroleum jelly. I don't know why I never noticed that. Maybe it's just because I always grew up with it in a household, but it makes me wonder, why the do we put that on our bodies? Like, they even recommend it after getting tattoos. They're like, yeah, smear that jizzle all over your raw open skin. It's good for it. Slap it on. I literally threw away my jar of Vaseline away that I had in my bathroom whilst writing this podcast episode. So, there's that. And now I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, get there, Alicia. Who's the guy who gave us lube? Who made it possible? It was all by one man. Again. This is the time we introduce one of our main characters to the stage. The unformidable Mr. John Davison Rockefeller Sr., because there's a lot of these guys. It's hard to keep track. He's the American oil tycoon, king of kerosene, and the name Rockefeller still has an enormous presence in American society today because of this guy, especially in the oil industry around the world. Not only thanks to his immense wealth and so his barbaric business tactics, but also thanks to his influence in politics, diplomacy, and other secret services. Oh, and his descendants turned out to be fucking assholes. I made him even more infamous later, the name down the line. But John D. Sr. was the first sole American billionaire in history, meaning singular. Born July 8th, 1839 in New York, this guy turned the world on their heads. And I have to say, out of all the old rich men I've learned about over the past several weeks, this is the one guy I can say, respect. Not his kids, but this guy, respect. Quoted saying, get rich by taking something common and making it uncommon, end quote. And so he would. Although Mr. Johnny D did some very naughty things, this guy, honestly, is probably the only one out of the elite group of families that may rule the world that rose from literal rags to riches. And boy, did they. I mean, this family's wealth at one point was about 2% of the US GDP. Okay, rise he did. Even though Senior went on to take JP Morgan's place as far as political status and wealth, maybe because this lived for so damn long. He lived until 97. IDK. But he lived to see the turn of the freaking century, yo. But Johnny came from piss poor literal nothing. In fact, his daddy, William Avery Rockefeller, Billiam, was known as Devil Bill. And boy, did he get around between plowing them fields and fooling in the sheets, if you know what I'm saying. If not, Devil Bill was a piece of shit, to put it lightly. He fooled around with all the ladies, got lots of their egos prego, and then would dip. Bye, he's not mine. But Billiam, he looks just like you. Oh. JD Sr.'s biological father was actually so well known as a POS, a charlatan really, that his family would get chased out of towns on their dad's behalf. Could you imagine? Devil Bill would just up and leave his families because, remember, he had lots of them. And he'd go out into the world trying to come up with quick ways to make cash, but he sucked at it. He even tried being a magician for a while, but turns out he wasn't very good at that either. Shocker. He traveled to all these other towns under the name Dr. Affilié. Dr. Affilié. Selling snake oil and shit that wouldn't even cure a wart on your finger, let alone bring sight back or make a layman walk like he'd advertise, you know. You could sell anything back then. Here's a magical box of rocks. It will kill cancer. $100. What? He was just a con man. Let's be real. But that's not to say that this con man didn't teach his kids how to stay sharp. In the sense, when he would show up, he'd offer small loans to his sons just to come back randomly and take these loans back without any notice. He taught these boys to stay quick-witted, trust no one, not even your daddy, be cutthroat, always find the best deals, always have a money reserve, and always keep a ledger. Which I thought was so funny because what's a con man with no money doing with a banking ledger, right? Who knows? Regardless, this is something that was instilled in John D. Sr. He and his whole family carried ledgers till the day they died. Actually, when he married his wife, I read that he even got her a ledger. What are you doing? Ew, you don't have a ledger? I can't marry you if you don't have a... What are you doing? Anyway, the only thing Devil Bill was good at was deviling. And somehow being able to reel in all the ladies. Not even Johnny's mama Eliza could pass up the advances of Devil Bill. Maybe he was devilishly handsome or something. Because even though he dippity-doo-dah all the time, John D. Rockefeller and his 5 siblings were all a byproduct of the same spunk, a.k.a. Devil Bill. Like Eliza, girl, stop letting him through your pearly gates, okay? He's not worthy. Cast that devil back down to hell. But this is where you start to kind of like Senior. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I actually was thinking about this. Isn't it funny how you tend to like the bad guys sometimes? I'm not kidding. If they made a movie about this guy's life and if they cast him right with someone sexy and shrouded in mystery, I'd probs hop on board that train. You'll see why that's funny in a bit, because he monopolizes the railroads. But in my reading, I kept thrusting it up my hand like Judd Nelson from The Breakfast Club. Yeah, Johnny! Because this guy's come up was nothing short of amazing. Not gonna lie. Even if he was very, very naughty down the line. Unlike the others who I felt were entitled and came from banking backgrounds, John Rockefeller Sr. is the man you, me, and the everyday people could probably relate to the most. Yeah, Johnny. That's all, and those other guys, they're impressive. I mean, look where they are. But their influence and power and riches were generational. I mean, let's be honest. And with our monopoly man, Mr. J.P. Morgan, who I hate, sure, he was cutthroat and had his reign of terror, but he had the means in the beginning and the help from his father and the Rothschilds and the Freemasons. That catapulted him to the top, They all pretty much grew up in like a position, a time and space where they could dominate. Rockefeller had to work. Rockefeller had a different kind of hunger. The only hunger you can learn from literal starvation. Yeah. He manifested his life by literally telling himself every single day, this is where he got super inspirational, quote, I am destined to be rich. And I was like, yes, we love a good manifestation. I know you do. I was actually influenced by John D. Rockefeller Sr. to start saying this every day. Because, I mean, if it worked for him, hello, money, come to me. Money, come to me. My money dance. Ooh. I mean, if it worked for him, why couldn't it work for all of us, right? Compared to the rest of these families we've discussed, Johnny pretty much waltzed right in off the street and made everyone his bitch. So, love that. John was well known for giving back billions in charity over the extent of his lifetime. And we also love that. Some say this was their way of sanitizing the media, which I can understand. But regardless, they really did give back billions. In fact, his charity began at the age of 9, which I was like, damn. Despite being poor, his mother always instilled in her kids to give back. Now, John was the sole breadwinner for a family of 7, because Devil Bill. He'd come and go as he'd please. And Johnny D was forced to go to work and go to school because his mother wouldn't let him quit, which is great, but things were tough. And although things were hard, this taught John at a very young age how to grind. He developed a great work ethic and started finding creative ways to bring money into the family. Like, I read in one instance, he found baby turkeys abandoned by their mama. He brought them home to raise them for eggs, reproduce, sell them, use them for food, whatever. But he'd always make sure to leave enough. He was able to find ways to make money not only once, but would keep the people coming back. He had something they needed, which was super innovative on his part because it was small ploys like this that would go on to make him so successful later in life. I mean, yes. All the claps for little John. But as wealthy and powerful as he became, it seemed he never forgot his beginnings. He always gave back, maybe due to the fact that he was a devout Northern Baptist. Differentist? Southern. It is a Christian Protestant denomination. If you don't know, they usually have good worship bands. Lord, oh, lead on. Lord, oh, lead on. I used to sing in the worship band when I was a prisoner of private non-denominational Christian school. Good times. Good times. Now, I don't want my impression of Senior to take away from the fact that he really did ruin many people's lives through his cutthroat monopolistic takeovers. He absolutely burned generational empires to the ground while doing a little no-rain dance around the flames for his rise to power. And it was wrong for so many reasons, but for some reason, this guy, unlike the rest, did it in style. Hit on me later. I don't understand it either. I have a bad boy complex. It's not my fault. But it's his descendants you really need to be concerned about. They turned into the really scary guys. You'll see. So John Sr. starts making a steady passive income for the family until Daddy Devil Bill rolls back through. And in Devil Bill fashion, he has a bunch of gifts and sweets, but no real money to give to support this big family. He'd just kind of show up long enough to crash at their place, eat their food, get Eliza pregnant again, and then he'd leave and take their money. Because of this, Johnny's family had to move around a lot because of his father's reputation. And that never became a serious issue until John was about 16. And all these allegations kept coming up about Devil Bill. It was thought that he had raped a maid. And now think about this. This is pre-Civil War era. It's not necessarily the time we'd burn people at the stake, but it is still a time the town folk would chase you out of town with fire and a bunch of pitchforks. You know what I'm saying? Like, think Frankenstein style. And Billiam's poor family took the brunt of his awful crimes. This is when Devil Bill unofficially kind of left the family. But he would really leave a stain on John D. Rockefeller's childhood. And it was one that John would try to hide for the remainder of his life. But after this whirlwind of events, they eventually settled in Cleveland, Ohio. Which, if you guys have also noticed, our last three guys that we've talked about also lived or made a freaking killing in Ohio. It was definitely a hub during the industrial boom. So John D. could no longer support the family and all that they were up against when they moved to Ohio. And he couldn't go to school at the same time. So he ends up dropping out his junior year against his mother's wishes and started applying for everything imaginable. I mean, he applied at all major banks, firms, merchants. I mean, this guy was really reaching for the stars. We should call him Kid because he's a kid at the time. And that's why nobody wanted him with his age and his lack of experience. But he was thorough and orderly and smart. And he had great penmanship, which was like a much needed job back in the day. Freemasons wanted that shit too because they needed little sheepies to copyright down their shiznits, you know? And side note, it's wild to me that they don't value calligraphy anymore. It's like a sad lost art. They aren't required to teach cursive in US schools anymore, which I find baffling. How's a kid supposed to sign his signature? And no offense, my 2% of guy listeners, but I'm sure your handwriting isn't the most eligible, right? Am I right? Yeah. Bring cursive back to schools. Anyway, John D. Sr. finally got his first real job at a little firm as a bookkeeper, and this was life-changing for him. It was a fantastic fit considering he always kept his handy little ledger. Look at that, it came in handy. But John was ecstatic, you know? This is his first job. He ended up marking September 26th as job day for the rest of his life. And I'm not kidding. I read that Johnny could care less about Christmas or birthdays, but job day? Oh, snap. Job day was the one holiday he gave a rat's ass about celebrating. Claps for job day. Yay. So when this dude got his first check, you can imagine how over the moon he was. Like a cow. Okay? And might I add, these guys didn't pay well. It was like 50 cents a day. That would suck. So he still had to have all these side hustles because they didn't pay him for like the first 3 months either. And when they did, it was like for $50. But boy, it didn't make a difference because when Johnny D. Sr. got that first check, that's when he started repeating those words to himself. I am destined to be rich. I am destined to be rich. I am destined to be rich. And it's said that he said this every morning, even after he made his billions, even on his deathbed. I am destined to be rich. And like my main man, this guy just seems cool, right? He manifested his own wealth, worked his nuts off for it, sure, but also had some lucky moments coming up. This guy celebrates his own successes, and that's the kind of energy, and belief we need in ourselves, straight up. That's why I'm saying, respect. After a while, the firm noticed John's hard work, and he got a raise to $300 a year, which is like $11,000 today. But This helped secure his family and made them financially stable for like the first time ever. So that was good. And now I know what you might be thinking. Maybe something like I did. Sweet, a better, air quotes, bad guy, an anti-villain, a good bad guy who might be in this cartel running the world. You know, maybe that's a good thing. He'd have been watching out for all us little people. Well, he still dominated the Western world and parts of Europe, so don't get carried away. But when you come from severe poverty and you make it big time, it makes a bit more sense as to why some get so dang greedy. And you'll see Johnny D, he sure does get greedy. Some historians even argue that when Johnny D came onto the Wall Street scene, he was more heinous than J.P. Morgan with his monopolistic industry takeovers. Because John Rockefeller didn't take no for an answer, because he saw business as war. Johnny saw competition as a personal act of terrorism against him. So, what does a tycoon do when he feels threatened? He cuts you down completely. Remember I said JD also had these side hustles in order to provide for a family of 7. Well, one was about to pay out big. In the 2 years JD was working at this firm, he made friends with a chemist named Maurice Clark. The two end up going into business together with the idea of Johnny's young trades in mind, of buying and reselling food. No, it's not a bad idea. They ended up naming their company Clark and Rockefeller. They'd resell produce, grains, meats, fish. They'd even sell prohibited bootleg liquor to the troops. Farm to table as best as you could find at the time, really. They would aim to buy low and sell high and become the central food hub, the grocery store before the grocery stores, Kroger, whatever, of Cleveland, you know. And they did. Everyone started coming to them, including big businesses. The United States was also at civil war. Troops on the front lines needed food. Business grew so large and so quickly, in fact, they needed to upscale their business because the demand for food was so high, especially since they were one of the only plants that could export fresh foods at the time around the country using, the railroads. But they would run out of capital before they could restock. People were buying faster than farmers could grow. And John understood that he could only go so far in the industry unless they spread out quickly. They put out the word to a bunch of investors and banks that they were looking for a $15,000 loan to upscale their business, when really that was far more than what their infant company was worth at the time. But word on the street was these were some big bulldogs. People knew these big businesses, and the war demand was now paying these fresh young fellas on the scene. And the banks, well, they wanted in on it. So, what do you think happened? They bought Johnny and Maurice's bluff, and a few banks collectively came to them and granted this loan when the two only planned to apply for a $5,000 loan. That's your first strike of luck. It's all word by mouth, too. After they were granted this loan, Clark and Rockefeller freaking boomed. Profited $500,000 in their first year, which if you've ever been a business owner or been in business, that's like, damn. Clark and Rockefeller became the main food supplier to the Union Army, catapulting Cleveland as the industrial hub. He met his goals pretty damn quickly. Manifestation! And then it was at this time another opportunity arose. This is where our guy Johnny D. Rockefeller Sr. finds his real prized pig, black gold. This is before cars were a big deal, so the oil industry was mainly for lamps. And fun fact, back in the day, for thousands of years, we used to use whale fat for our oil to burn in lanterns. Yes, like the big whales in the ocean. Their lard. I can only imagine how great that scented candle smelled. Humans use this as a burning oil for so long, in fact, entire whale species went at extinct. And since that wasn't really sustainable because they could only whale so much, the whale and oil industry was on the decline until they discovered kerosene. In 1859, Pennsylvania set up its first crude oil derrick, changing America and arguably the world forever. Because shit, you could just pull this stuff out of the ground. Holy cow, that's so much easier than murdering entire pods of poor whales. Gosh, what do you know? It was here this guy, Samuel Andrews, he's a chemist working at this place, he discovers the ability to refine crude oil. He develops kerosene using sulfuric acid to separate the crude oil. Now, this is a big effing deal, you guys, because this is before electricity was used everywhere, okay? Lanterns were everything. Lanterns, using this stuff was vastly better than candles or whale fat. Hello, think of all the historical fires. I'm talking about you, Chi-Town. Just better to keep the fire enclosed and have your little baggies of kerosene tucked safely inside. Ain't that some ironic shit, though, that oil is so bad for the environment and yet originally it saved the whales? Wild. So then a chemist, Samuel Andrews, approaches Maurice Clark and J.D. Rockefeller for a loan. And at first these guys are like, they thought Andrews had some lofty dreams because he hit him up with a great gusto. Like, yo, I'm going to change the world by bringing safer light into everyone's homes. And Clark and JD are kind of looking at him, looking at each other. And they say, we'll see. That's literally how they got into the oil industry, guys. Could you imagine looking back on your life? That had to be your luckiest fucking day. Tapping into black gold before there was even a market for it. Within 1 year, 1 year, kerosene becomes their top producer. And these guys decide to abandon the food industry completely, which is crazy to think about because that business was thriving. It was making them $500,000 a year. It gives you perspective on how hot kerosene was. They decided to go all in on the oil industry. Put all those eggs in that oil basket, bitch. I am destined to be rich. They were like, fuck oil or fuck food, oil, you know? But here's the issue. The oil market was volatile. Prices would flex from like 10 cents a barrel to $14 a barrel day to day sometimes. So it's super unpredictable. Also, since this is like the beginning of oil drilling, it is believed that it was a fossil fuel or whatever, and there was a limited amount of it. It wouldn't replenish itself. So the value would go up and down constantly. And nowadays, we've learned differently. We know to give wells time. You know, they will replenish. But at the time, all these oil reserves that they would tap into, they drill faster than the well could replenish. So people just thought that when they were out, they were out. Oil's dry. Let's move on. That's why you have all those little ghost towns. Mind you, this is also before offshore rigging, all that high-tech stuff. So America literally only had crude oil in Pennsylvania. It was absolutely considered a finite resource at the time. Now, all this is stressing Johnny's partner, Maurice Clark, out. He ultimately ends up getting spooked because this is like the wild freaking West. These air quotes gents are lawless cowboys in suits with money for guns. Okay? Let me paint the scene. By this point, JP Morgan already owned the banking system. He already monopolized the railroads, marine, mercantile, and the steel and iron industries. JP Morgan was no cool cucumber. And Maurice did not want to tangle with the likes of these big cats. And let's be real, the unpredictability of this new oil market was giving him ulcers, or so we can assume. But John D. Rockefeller, he saw it differently. He saw it as a game of wits and battle. So Maurice ended up selling his share of the business to John. And with that transaction, it made John D. Rockefeller sole owner of what would go on to be Standard Oil. Are you thrusting your hands up in the air for Johnny D yet? I'm like, yeah. I mean, he hasn't done anything naughty yet. Not really. I mean, we can still cheer for him for now, right? This guy ended up building a second refinery because business was booming. King of Kerosene even started selling to Europe. So that's how vast and widespread his business was. But business grew so large, he needed help. He ended up taking on another partner named Henry Flagler, who was actually said to be just as ruthless or more so than John D. Rockefeller, because he saw business competition as either we're going to completely kill and demolish these people, or we're just going to absorb them. There is no in between. And the two guys partnering together made for a diabolical duo. Years down the line, after much success together, more competition kept popping up because people figured out the secret recipe to creating kerosene. But you think John was ever worried? No. Because, one, he'd reign as king of kerosene for so long, but also he'd sold his product at an astonishing low price. So by default, he would still get all the business, even in economic declines. Homie was still raking in the cash. And he would also do some shady things to also try and get ahead. John would meet with the three major railroad companies at the time to try and get the best shipping and manufacturing rates, but 2 out of the 3 companies were like, hey, Pennsylvania is a little far away. Most of our business is in Cleveland. I don't know if we can give you cheaper rates, blah, 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 blah. And then here's a classic example of, oh shit, we gotta do what the big dog's doing. In rebellion to these railroad companies not bending to his will, John D. Sr. completely closes shop in Ohio, which starts a panic. This sets off a ripple effect to all the other oil companies. They're like, oh, he's doing it, so we must. So many followed suit and also closed shop, and this became a huge issue for New York Railroad and the Erie Railroad, because Ohio, like I said, was like their main source of business. So then, after John creates this conflict, John swoops in like the good guy. This is where he starts to turn like a bad apple. Wink. And he offers these guys an exclusive contract with both railroads at rock bottom prices, with contingencies, of course. He's like, hey, babe, bring business back to Cleveland if you give me even lower rates than what I previously asked for. And they had no choice but to accept, or they would go under. That's how big business he was. He sweetened the deal for many executives, saying, I'll give you X amount of guaranteed business. In exchange, you're going to give me the lowest prices possible to me and me alone. Period. He offered them secret railroad bonds to keep the companies afloat. He also controlled railroads by other means of extortion. Oh, Johnny, you're so naughty. At the time, a new railroad was being built, so JD took an interest and loaned them a good sum of money to help complete it. But it said he took to old Devil Bill's tactics because without notice, John decided to take back the loan. He told these guys that they needed to repay it in full to save him from, quotes, financial embarrassment, which I don't really know what that means. But John only gave these guys 24 hours to repay. And these guys actually tried, but when they got to the bank, multiple banks, John had already called and said, hey, their credit isn't worth jack. So the banks didn't even consider giving him a loan. Needless to say, these guys became John's bitch and were in financial ruin over him. And these transactions were called railroad rebates. While the companies and the government weren't happy about them, there were no laws set in place yet. They were upheld. Not only does John end up getting what he wanted in the first place, but he also secured his stronghold as the leader of the industry because he was able to continue selling kerosene at the lowest prices on the market, thanks to all these tactics and saving on shipping costs. J.D. Rockefeller was now in the position where he controlled the price of oil. Since other oil companies couldn't match his low prices, he'd keep his prices so low until competition had no choice but to go out of business. Or they would get bought up by Standard Oil, which is basically the same thing. Then, after he would absorb as many companies as he could, he'd raise the price of kerosene sky high because, oh shit, he could, because now his product was the only one on the market. Okay, Johnny, that's kind of evil. Now there was no more cheap, safer light for the people unless they wanted to pay an arm or a leg. And this started to piss off a lot of people around the world because everyone's buying his kerosene. Rightfully so. You can't give us the gift of light, then just take it back. What are you thinking? Who are you? Oh, you're John D. Rockefeller. Okay. Maybe you can. But then this is when John decides to create a little group, the SCI, South Improvement Company, which was basically an intel operation for John Rockefeller, where all the CEOs of all three major railroad companies would come to him and meet, have a cup of tea. No, they'd basically tell John when to cut prices, when to raise. They were spies. They even had a secret language. Like, everything was in code. And you want to know what John D. Rockefeller's code name was? You're never going to guess it. It was a cartoon. Chowder! Yes, John D. Rockefeller's code name was Chowder. Why? But the SIC would also help John by screwing with his competition for him, right? They would, air quotes, cut railroad shipments. Like, oh, ship Standard Oils only, but you'd be X amount of train cars short for the other refineries. They don't matter, Bill. Whatever. Or Standard Oil would buy up all the sulfuric, I cannot say that word to save my life, sulfuric acid, or all the barrels on the market. So the other refineries would have to stop production, right? Because they would have nowhere to store their oil, or they couldn't mix kerosene. Sneaky. But us people aren't freaking idiots, okay? What John Sr. was doing was so obvious to the public because, again, this is pre-anti-monopoly laws. The people knew about the SIC. They knew he was manipulating the market. The public wanted Johnny's head. Now. So in response, the SIC was disbanded after just 2 months, okay? Because it was no secret what they were doing. But Standard Oil's business as usual didn't end. Not with that. With this and the high prices on kerosene, people rioted. They started ripping up railroads, dumping oil shipments. Some oil drillers even boycotted Standard Oil and the SIC. So Johnny was like, fine. You don't want me to hide my monopolistic takeovers? Then I'm going to fucking do it in front of your faces. Because he could. And again, at this time, monopolies were not illegal yet. So this is crazy. In the following 6 short weeks, just 6 weeks, John Rockefeller bought up 22 of 26 refineries in what was known as the Cleveland Massacre for basically pennies on the dollar. Okay? He got them for so cheap because people figured, oh shit, this guy's going to come for me at some point anyway. Just take it. Just take it. Then by 1873, John D. Sr. could produce 1 million barrels of kerosene a year. This is when he started investing in oil pipelines, started figuring out how to control every aspect of that industry between refining, exporting, etc. Like cutting out the middleman, making as much money, all the profit as possible, And then oil started popping up everywhere, not just the East Coast. John realized piping was much easier than shipping. He could make loads more off of it, cutting out the rail and have an even tighter control on the industry. By 1879, at just 40 years old, John, Standard Oil, owned 1/3 of the oil wells of the world, but 90% of the world's oil refineries. By 1880, he owned 90% of oil marketing. Yeah. This is also when Rockefeller's chemists discover that gasoline is a byproduct of kerosene, just in time for that automobile boom in the late 1880s. They really struck gold. And prior to this, they would literally throw away gasoline because they didn't realize the value of it. So when gasoline becomes a necessity, cha-ching, think about all the profit that came in from that. Eventually, our country does develop the antitrust laws or acts against monopolies, as we know. And this man is why. John would use trusts as secret methods to get around these new monopoly laws popping up. Get this. They'd have stockholders from like 40 different companies secretly trade their shares for certificates in the Standard Oil Trust. So basically, the trust became one corporation with all 40 of these smaller corporations. Think of it as like a legal shield. But the United States took him to court anyway. Those stopped working. And they made an example out of him. The underdog. Oh, but not J.P. Morgan, no. In the infamous case, United States versus Standard Oil in 1911, the Supreme Court found John D. Rockefeller Sr. guilty of breaking this new Sherman antitrust law. Like, a government literally had to create laws to try and stop this man's businesses. They literally had to make laws to make it illegal. So then Senior was forced to break Standard Oil up into 34 smaller companies. But before you celebrate, John understood that these 34 pieces were worth far more than Standard Oil as a whole. So he was like, go for it. Go for it. He made billions off that alone. He can thank 33rd degree Freemason President Roosevelt for that. Absolutely. But also, since Pepys thought he didn't have ownership over all these small refineries anymore, their stock saw a huge increase because people were more willing to invest thinking that he wasn't involved. But guys, get this. He still owned a quarter of all 34 companies. That was a part of the deal. He still was part owner with a controlling interest in every single one of them. So he's just like, sweet, I'll stick on the sidelines. I'll let y'all think I'm unaffiliated. But I am. Keep investing. You're making me a billionaire. I am destined to be rich. Woo! This whole thing tripled his wealth and at the ready age of retirement. At 80 years old. And I heard by the time he retired, Senior was a bit senile. That's fair. That's fair to say. Every day at 3:15, he'd have sexy time. No, legitimately. He'd have young women come over most afternoons so they could spend it with him under blankets, driving around, snuggling. Johnny D was also said to have a stash of diamonds on him in his later years. He would allegedly hand them out for free to whomever he'd meet throughout his days. So I'd love to meet that guy. Here, take some diamonds. I will. Give them all to me. Ugh. But that is the life of John D. Sr., pretty much. In the next episode, I'll introduce our other two main characters. The two that have so many conspiracies swirling around them, it makes my head hurt. It was no secret that by the time the Cleveland Massacre in 1937 happened, when Senior flipped a big old bird to the public and the U.S. government, when he bought up nearly every refinery, that the Rockefeller name it was no secret that it wasn't loved. In fact, it was despised. People knew he was a monopoly man. He was found guilty in a court of law. They didn't like him at all. While the hearings were ongoing, the truth came out about his upbringing and his father, Devil Bill. and what John D. did to get to where he was. Well, folks cursed the name Rockefeller, but the uneasy feelings on the family would only grow. Although Sr. was said to be an incredible father, because he had never had one, his kids did not have the same perspective that he did. They were born into riches. They were entitled and privileged, and the actions they took throughout their lifetimes did not help public opinion or growing conspiracy theories about them. In fact, it absolutely fueled them. Next week, I like these two-parters. Part 2. For the craziest conspiracies on the Rockefeller clan. If you enjoyed this episode, you can please like and subscribe to the show for a quick shout out. You can also find the show on social media under Hard Talks Podcast. Until next time, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay weird, stay kind, think unlimited. I love you. Bye.